The world has been in uproar since Trump came into power for the second time. In just a few days, Trump has changed so many things that the world has gotten used to, including withdrawing the US from the Paris Agreement and suspending US foreign aid. Traoré sees Trump's decision as a way for African countries to be independent and self-reliant. This is why he has recently made certain moves to increase rice production in Burkina Faso.
In a bold and unexpected move, Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré has made headlines across the globe by announcing that his country will now provide rice to feed the entire African continent, effectively replacing USAID as the key supplier of food aid to the region. But what does this mean for the future of Africa's food security, and how will it affect the decades-long relationships between the US and African nations? By leveraging Burkina Faso's agricultural potential and challenging traditional sources of aid, Traoré is sending a clear message. Africa is ready to take control of its own destiny. In this video, we'll break down the reasons behind this decision, explore its potential consequences, and discuss what this could mean for the future of African economies and global power dynamics.
Explain what USAID is all about and highlight what Traoré thinks of President Trump's decision. Under the order of President Traoré, the governor of Hauts-Bassins, a region in Burkina Faso, Madame Mariana Konate, paid a visit to the wheat field located in the developed plain of Bazan on Friday, January 31st, 2025. The ongoing work proved all that President Traoré has been saying all this while. Burkina Faso and other African nations do not need financial aid from the US or any other nation.
The unlikely rivalry. In a geopolitical twist that has many scratching their heads, Ibrahim Traoré, a former military leader turned strategic mastermind, is now positioning himself as a major player in global food aid. What's even more stunning is the rise of his influence in Africa, a continent often seen as reliant on Western aid programs like USAID, United States Agency for International Development. As America has long been the go-to provider of humanitarian assistance, particularly food aid, Traoré's audacious move to push the US aside by feeding millions of Africans with rice, replacing USAID as the primary supplier, has created a narrative that feels like a rivalry of titans. While the US continues to flex its muscle globally, Trump's America is now facing a challenge from an unexpected front, as Traoré's plan to end hunger in Africa via rice imports is taking off at a rapid pace. The question on everyone's mind: how did this relatively unknown military figure rise to challenge a global power like the United States? How has he built an empire that now makes him a rival of Trump's America in the international aid game? The birth of a rival. Ibrahim Traoré's story is one of resilience, timing, and ambition. A leader of Burkina Faso, his rise to prominence came after military coups thrust him into power, making him an overnight figure in African politics. Unlike the US, which has historically used diplomacy and soft power to influence its relationships, Traoré has taken a very different route: direct action, strategy, and a hyper-focus on feeding the masses. This bold move, however, didn't happen overnight. The United States had been the dominant food aid provider for decades, with USAID playing a central role in ensuring millions across Africa survived periods of drought, famine, and war. But as Western aid often comes with strings attached, Traoré identified an opening to not only address the food crisis in Africa, but to do so on his own terms. Trump's America had a reputation for pulling back from global leadership, particularly in terms of humanitarian aid, where support to African nations dwindled under his administration. This gave Traoré the chance to step up and offer a different, more direct solution: rice. He saw rice as a sustainable and culturally neutral crop that could help address the long-standing issue of food security in Africa, while also making a bold statement. He didn't need American assistance to solve his continent's hunger problems.
Upon her visit to the farm, which is about 450 hectares of land, with 100 hectares dedicated to wheat production, speaking during the visit, the president of the Cooperative Society of Wheat and Rice Production in the region stated that, "We are mobilized and available to do better." He also welcomed the government's initiatives and the support provided to producers, stressing that this first experience will allow them to learn and improve wheat and rice production in the years to come.
The rise of a new rice empire. The emergence of Traoré as a powerful force in the global food aid industry has been nothing short of transformative. At first glance, his move into the rice trade might have seemed unlikely. After all, the global rice market had long been dominated by major players such as China, India, and the United States. Yet, through a series of shrewd political moves and a deep understanding of Africa's agricultural potential, Traoré has not only established himself as a formidable player in the rice industry, but has also revolutionized food aid on the continent. For decades, Africa has been heavily reliant on foreign food aid, particularly from the United States through USAID, United States Agency for International Development. The model of aid provided by USAID often left African nations dependent on Western countries for food security, creating a cycle that was difficult to break. However, Traoré saw this dependency as an opportunity to build something self-sustaining, economically empowering, and ultimately independent of the long-standing aid system. With a keen eye for business and a deep commitment to his continent's prosperity, Traoré began to invest in large-scale rice production across Africa. The African continent is home to vast areas of fertile land, but historically, the agricultural sector has struggled with underdevelopment. Traoré recognized the untapped potential in the agricultural space and understood that rice, a staple food for much of Africa's population, was a critical commodity to focus on. By creating a network of large-scale rice farms and fostering partnerships with countries like Vietnam and Thailand, major rice producers, he was able to build a robust supply chain that could deliver affordable, high-quality rice directly to African markets. Traoré's move into the rice trade wasn't merely about creating a new business opportunity. His strategy was to build a distribution network that could provide a sustainable food source for millions of people across Africa. This meant more than just selling rice. It meant reshaping how food aid is perceived and delivered to the continent. By localizing rice production, he minimized Africa's reliance on imports, including American aid, and ensured that African nations could access rice that was produced within their own borders. The Rice Initiative gained rapid momentum. What started as a business idea quickly became a game-changer in the global food aid sector. Traoré's Rice Initiative positioned him as a major supplier of rice to Africa, potentially eclipsing USAID as the dominant food aid provider. This shift represented a significant departure from the traditional model of foreign aid and introduced a new, more sustainable and self-reliant approach. Not only did it reduce the continent's dependence on foreign countries for food, but it also empowered local economies by creating jobs, boosting agricultural innovation, and promoting economic independence. The success of Traoré's Rice Initiative was a win-win for Africa. Not only were people being fed, but local economies were being stimulated. The growth of the rice industry created thousands of jobs, from farming to distribution, ensuring that more people across the continent were able to secure livelihoods. The ripple effects of this economic boost were felt in communities, as incomes rose and food security became a reality for more families. From a geopolitical standpoint, the rise of Traoré's rice empire had significant implications. USAID had long been a dominant force in Africa, and the idea that a homegrown African entrepreneur could challenge this system was not just disruptive, it was revolutionary. The Trump administration, with its America First policies, could only watch as Traoré's empire flourished. It served as a reminder that African nations had the resources and talent to become self-sufficient, reducing their reliance on foreign aid in favor of homegrown solutions. In essence, Traoré wasn't just selling rice. He was selling Africa's potential for self-sufficiency, economic growth, and independence. His vision of a self-sustaining, localized food network has the potential to reshape the future of Africa's agricultural landscape, empowering a new generation of farmers, entrepreneurs, and communities across the continent. As his rice empire continues to grow, the message is clear. Africa can and should feed itself, and the days of dependency on foreign aid may soon be behind it.
If U.S. aid funding is being squandered through corruption, then the question arises, should the US continue providing financial assistance to Africa under such conditions. Instead of ensuring that these resources reach the people who need them most, corrupt government officials, bureaucrats, and elites siphon off large portions of the funds.
Trump's response: rhetoric versus reality. As Traoré's rice empire flourished, former President Donald Trump found himself increasingly alarmed by the shifting dynamics of food aid in Africa. Having long been a key player in the global food aid industry, particularly through USAID, the prospect of losing influence in Africa to a former military leader became a challenge to both his political ego and his nation's status as the world's primary humanitarian benefactor. America's dominance in food aid had been taken for granted for decades, but Traoré's rise was threatening to undermine that legacy. Trump, never one to back down from a challenge, wasted no time in reacting. His response was typical of his style: brash, public, and aimed at reaffirming America's role as the greatest provider of aid. Through a series of public statements, media appearances, and tweets, he sought to remind the world of the historical generosity of the United States, lauding programs like USAID as proof of America's commitment to global welfare. Trump's narrative was one of self-congratulation, presenting the U.S. as the undisputed champion of global aid and casting doubt on the feasibility of Africa's reliance on an alternative like Traoré's initiative. However, Trump's rhetoric couldn't alter the reality unfolding on the ground. The rise of Traoré's rice empire was more than just a business success. It was a political shift in how Africa viewed its future. Traoré was not only offering rice, but a new kind of leadership, one that was rooted in local solutions, sustainability, and self-reliance. Africa no longer saw the U.S. as the only reliable source of aid. Traoré's approach, which prioritized local production, job creation, and economic empowerment, resonated deeply with African leaders and citizens who had grown weary of dependency on Western aid. In many African countries, Trump's words fell flat, met with disdain or outright skepticism. His America First rhetoric, which had alienated many international allies during his presidency, did little to regain the trust of African nations. Meanwhile, Traoré's practical, homegrown leadership was gaining traction. For Africans, the former military leader wasn't just providing food, he was offering dignity and sovereignty over their own food security. This stark contrast between Trump's bluster and Traoré's tangible impact on the ground made the former president's rhetoric seem increasingly out of touch with the realities of Africa's evolving needs. Trump, a seasoned negotiator, was now in unfamiliar territory. He had built his political and business career on the ability to outmaneuver his opponents. But in this instance, he found himself outplayed by a man who understood Africa's needs far more intimately. Traoré's vision of a self-sufficient, locally led food aid system made the traditional model of American aid seem outdated and paternalistic. The shift in power dynamics was clear. Trump had underestimated the rise of local leadership in Africa, and in doing so, had failed to recognize the changing tides in global aid. While America's history of generosity was undeniable, it no longer held the same sway in Africa, where Traoré had already positioned himself as a leader who understood both the problems and the solutions facing the continent. Trump's failure to adapt to this new reality exposed a deeper issue. The rhetoric of American exceptionalism no longer held the same weight in a world that was increasingly focused on local, sustainable solutions to global challenges. In the new food aid game, Traoré was the rising star, and Trump was being left behind. USAID's decline, a changing of the guard. For decades, USAID had been the cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy, symbolizing America's commitment to the global good. But as Africa's needs evolved, so too did its expectations. The classic aid model, sending food, money, and resources to struggling countries, began to show its limitations. Critics of USAID pointed to its bureaucratic inefficiencies, high overhead costs, and a general sense of dependency it fostered within African nations. Traoré's challenge was not only about feeding people, it was about disrupting the very model that had been in place for decades. His goal was clear: to provide food that didn't come with a political agenda and to create a more sustainable approach to solving hunger. He focused on the production of local agricultural goods that could be cultivated within Africa itself, reducing the dependency on foreign aid and creating a model that was rooted in local empowerment. The results were clear. African leaders began to realize the long-term benefits of Traoré's strategy: increased self-sufficiency, local economic development, and food sovereignty. This was a direct challenge to USAID's decades of influence, and many African nations began turning away from US-based aid programs in favor of Traoré's model. USAID, in its effort to compete, was unable to keep up with the speed at which Traoré established himself as the primary provider of food aid across the continent. The political ramifications: who controls the future of aid? As the US watches from the sidelines, the international aid landscape is shifting dramatically. Traoré's triumph marks a pivotal moment in the evolving global power structure, as the role of Western influence, particularly the US, faces unprecedented challenges from regional leaders with new ideas, resources, and the will to make a real impact. The real question is, who controls the future of aid? With Trump's America caught up in domestic turmoil, political distractions, and increasingly isolationist tendencies, Traoré has seized the opportunity to redefine what it means to provide aid. The key here is not just about feeding people, it's about shifting power. Power over resources, power over policy, and power over Africa's future. While Trump's America fights battles over the national debt, borders, and trade, a new kind of leadership is emerging in Africa, and it's one that will shape the future of the continent. Traoré's success in feeding Africa not only undermines America's historical aid dominance, but also challenges the existing norms of international relations. As global politics continues to evolve, one thing is clear: Ibrahim Traoré has stunned the world, and the Trump administration is left trying to play catch-up. A new era of global leadership. The rivalry between Ibrahim Traoré and Donald Trump's America is not just about food. It's about redefining the global order and who holds the power in international aid. As Trump's America grapples with its diminished role on the world stage, Traoré's meteoric rise represents the changing face of global leadership. No longer will Africa be dependent on Western nations for survival. Instead, Traoré has shown that with vision, determination, and the will to act, even the smallest nations can rise to challenge the greatest powers in the world. The real winners in this rivalry will be the millions of people whose lives are now being fed by a new kind of leadership, one that prioritizes local empowerment over political influence. In the battle for global influence, it seems that Ibrahim Traoré has not only matched but surpassed the expectations of his competitors. Whether or not Trump can find a way to reclaim America's position in the aid game remains to be seen, but for now, Africa has found a new hero. As Burkina Faso rises as a new food supplier for Africa, Ibrahim Traoré's decision to replace USAID with his country's own rice production has set the stage for a monumental shift in how food aid is distributed and consumed across the continent. In an era where Western aid organizations are struggling with their own internal issues, this move is not just a symbolic victory for Burkina Faso, but a larger step toward African self-sufficiency and empowerment. We want to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and
let us know where you think this historic move will take Burkina Faso and the African continent. As always, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more updates on this game-changing story as it continues to unfold.